Now look, she made the statement about Hillary Clinton. I've heard the statement for years. I had no idea it was Michelle Obama. She made the statement that if you can't take care of your own house, you can't take care of the White House. You know, I've heard that.
Donald Trump begins by bringing up a comment that was originally directed at Hillary Clinton, noting that he had heard it repeated so often over the years that he never realized Michelle Obama was the one who first said it. The quote itself sounds simple enough. If someone cannot successfully manage their own household, how can they be trusted to run the White House? While the statement appears straightforward on the surface, political language often carries far more weight than it initially seems. Trump presents the remark as a familiar part of the national conversation, something that has been repeated so many times that it has almost become detached from its original source. However, once he specifically links the quote back to Michelle Obama, the discussion immediately takes on a more personal tone. What once sounded like a general political observation suddenly becomes tied to a recognizable public figure, changing how many people interpret its meaning. At that point, the focus shifts away from the words alone and toward the intention behind them. Was Trump simply referencing a well-known statement, or was he using it to raise broader questions about credibility and judgment without making a direct attack? Those are the kinds of questions that often transform a single quote into a much larger debate about perception, political strategy, and the messages public figures choose to send.
Michelle passionate in this election?
Yes.
Part of the reason that we get involved as much as we have is not just because we think Hillary's going to be a great president, but it's also because there is something qualitatively different about.
The conversation takes a different direction when Barack Obama steps in and offers a broader perspective on the election. Instead of responding directly to the earlier comment, he focuses on the larger political landscape and explains why people like Michelle Obama felt compelled to become so actively involved. Obama argues that their engagement was about more than simply supporting Hillary Clinton or believing she would be an effective president. In his view, there was a deeper issue at stake, something that made the political climate feel fundamentally different from anything voters had experienced before. One of the most striking aspects of his remarks is the way he describes the moment as being qualitatively different. While he does not immediately explain every detail behind that phrase, the wording itself carries significant weight. It suggests that the debate extends far beyond ordinary campaign disagreements or partisan rivalries. Instead, Obama points toward a broader contrast in leadership style, political conduct, and the way candidates communicate with the American public. That distinction changes the entire focus of the discussion. Suddenly, the audience is no longer judging a single quote or isolated exchange. They are being asked to compare two very different approaches to politics, two competing visions of leadership, and two fundamentally different ways of connecting with voters. What began as a conversation about one statement gradually evolves into a much larger debate about the future direction and character of political discourse in America.
Obama's speech last night where she said that you're in over your head and the wrong president for the country.
She was over her head, and frankly, she should have made the speech live, which she didn't do. She taped it, and it was not only taped, it was taped a long time ago because she had the wrong deaths. She didn't even mention the vice presidential candidate.
The discussion becomes significantly more intense when Donald Trump is asked to respond to Michelle Obama's speech, in which she argued that he was not prepared for the presidency and was the wrong choice to lead the country. Rather than focusing solely on the substance of her criticism, Trump immediately shifts attention to the way the speech was delivered. He questions why the address was pre-recorded instead of presented live, and argues that portions of it were based on information that was already outdated by the time it reached the public. Trump also points to the absence of certain key details, using those omissions to challenge the credibility of the message itself. At that point, the debate begins to move away from the original criticism and toward questions surrounding presentation, timing, and authenticity. The focus is no longer limited to what was said, but expands to include how the message was produced, when it was recorded, and whether viewers were
prouder to put this birth certificate matter to rest than the Donald. And that's because he can finally get back to focusing on the issues that matter. Like, did we
One of the most memorable moments comes when Barack Obama shifts away from direct political criticism and turns to humor to make his point. With perfect timing, he jokes that perhaps no one is more eager than Donald Trump to move beyond the birth certificate controversy, adding that doing so might finally give him time to focus on other mysteries, such as whether the moon landing really happened. The audience immediately erupts with laughter, but the joke serves a purpose beyond entertainment. By taking a controversial topic and extending it to an even more exaggerated example, Obama uses satire to highlight what he sees as a tendency for public attention to drift towards sensational distractions rather than more substantive issues. What makes the moment especially effective is the way it is delivered. Obama remains calm, composed, and completely in control, allowing the humor itself to carry the message without sounding angry or confrontational. That measured approach gives the joke greater impact because it encourages the audience to think as much as they laugh. On one level, it functions as a clever punchline, but on another, it raises broader questions about why certain stories dominate political conversations and how public attention...
Blame to go around, but you, Mr. Trump, recognized that the real problem was a lack of leadership, and so ultimately you didn't blame Little John or Meatloaf. You fired Gary Busey. And these are the kind of...
Obama continues building on the momentum of the joke by introducing familiar pop culture and reality television references, using humor to guide the audience toward a larger political point. He jokingly suggests that while many people could have been blamed for the situation, Trump supposedly identified the true problem as a leadership failure and responded by firing Gary Busey instead of directing criticism toward other well-known personalities. While the line is clearly intended to generate laughter, the underlying message is far more calculated than it first appears. Rather than delivering a direct political attack, Obama uses recognizable entertainment references to highlight what he views as a particular approach to leadership and decision-making. By drawing on examples that audiences instantly understand, he transforms a more complex political argument into something accessible and memorable. The humor acts as a vehicle for a deeper message, allowing listeners to engage with the criticism without feeling as though they are being lectured. At the same time, the joke creates a contrast between the responsibilities of governing and the dramatic storytelling often associated with television and celebrity culture. That contrast is where much of the humor's impact comes from. While the audience laughs at the reference itself, they're also encouraged to think about broader questions involving leadership, judgment, accountability, and the difference between managing public affairs and creating compelling entertainment. In that way, Obama delivers a critique that feels lighthearted on the surface while carrying a much more serious political message underneath.
It happened in Roswell. And where are Biggie and Tupac?
Obama keeps the joke going by expanding his list of famous mysteries, bringing up subjects like Roswell and the decades-long speculation surrounding Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur. With each new reference, the deeper point behind the humor becomes increasingly clear. He is no longer simply telling jokes for the sake of entertainment. Instead, he is using well-known conspiracy theories and cultural mysteries to illustrate how public attention can sometimes drift away from serious policy discussions and become consumed by speculation, curiosity, and media-driven narratives. The humor works because these examples are instantly recognizable, allowing the audience to understand the connection without the need for lengthy explanations. Beneath the laughter, however, lies a broader observation about how information spreads in the modern media environment. Some stories capture enormous public attention not because they are the most important or supported by the strongest evidence, but because they are dramatic, intriguing, and easy to share. By highlighting these examples, Obama draws attention to the way media cycles often reward what generates the greatest interest rather than what carries the greatest public significance. As a result, the audience is encouraged to think more carefully about how public attention is shaped, why certain narratives dominate headlines while others receive little coverage, and how entertainment value can sometimes overshadow substance. The joke may keep the mood light, but the underlying message remains serious. The stories that dominate public conversation are often driven as much by their ability to capture attention as by their actual importance.
And it went. You know, I've watched a lot of people, leaders, great leaders. And, you know, the one thing about sports is you break it down into, you know, a 2-hour period, something nice. You don't have to wait a lifetime to find out is somebody a winner or a loser. You got a lot of losers, mostly losers.
It's winning. You got to win. You know, I've watched a lot of people, leaders, great leaders. And, you know, the one thing about sports is you break it down into, you know, a 2-hour period, something nice. You don't have to wait a lifetime to find out is somebody a winner or a loser. You got a lot of losers.
At this point, the conversation takes another interesting turn as the focus shifts away from the back and forth exchanges and toward a broader examination of modern politics. The discussion is no longer centered solely on Donald Trump as an individual, but on the way political figures capture and maintain public attention. According to this perspective, much of Trump's influence comes not necessarily from the uniqueness of his ideas, but from the way he communicates them. The argument suggests that other politicians may express similar concerns or advocate comparable policies, yet they often fail to generate the same level of public interest. This shifts the conversation away from policy alone and toward the role of communication itself. In today's political environment, visibility is often shaped as much by presentation as it is by substance. The words chosen, the tone used, and the style of delivery can sometimes have just as much impact as the message being conveyed. That reality helps explain why certain political figures dominate headlines, social media discussions, and public debate, while others struggle to attract attention despite addressing many of the same issues. The focus moves beyond what is being said and toward how it is packaged, presented, and remembered by the public. Ultimately, the broader point is that in a media-driven age, communication style has become a powerful force in its own right, shaping public perception and influencing which voices remain at the center of political conversation long after the original statements have faded from memory.
I think it's restricted, by the way, to Mr. Trump. I mean, I find it interesting that everybody's focused on Trump primarily just because he says in more interesting ways what the other candidates are saying as well.
As the discussion reaches its conclusion, it arrives at one of the central themes that has long defined Donald Trump's public image: competition, achievement, and the importance of winning. Leadership is framed as a contest with clear outcomes, where success and failure are visible, measurable, and easy for the public to recognize. Within this perspective, there is less focus on lengthy explanations or detailed analysis, and greater emphasis on results. The question is not simply what a leader promises, but whether that leader appears capable of delivering victories and producing tangible outcomes. This viewpoint stands in sharp contrast to many of the other perspectives presented throughout the conversation. Looking back, the audience has witnessed several competing communication styles interacting with one another. There is satire designed to provoke reflection, criticism intended to challenge credibility, defensive responses aimed at reshaping the narrative, and direct arguments centered on performance and achievement. Each approach reflects a different understanding of leadership and a different philosophy regarding how political messages should be communicated. Rather than providing a single answer, the discussion leaves viewers comparing these competing visions side by side. The way leaders communicate, respond to criticism, and define success all shape how their messages are received by the public. Ultimately, the broader story extends far beyond any individual quote or isolated controversy. What begins with a discussion surrounding a well-known remark gradually evolves into a larger examination of credibility, leadership,